Why was everyone smirking as she walked past? Major Eva Rostova didn't ask. She learned long ago that silence could shield more than words ever could. The desert heat pressed down like a heavy hand, squeezing the breath from her lungs as she stepped off the transport onto the sand-blasted soil of forward operating base Sentinel. Rust-colored dust billowed around her boots, coating leather polished smooth by habit, not vanity. It clung to everything: the metal containers, the sandbagged walls, even the skin of soldiers too young to remember what war used to feel like. 53 years old. Silver streaked her hair, drawn tight in a regulation bun that gave no softness to the map of lines across her face. Those lines weren't laughter. They were deserts and winters, choices and consequences etched into her skin. She carried no bags, no rifle, no visible weight, but she carried history, and history is heavier than any rucksack. From the shade of the command post, Gunnery Sergeant Thorne watched her. He nudged the corporal beside him with a thick elbow and muttered, low enough for only one man to hear, though Eva caught it anyway. "Get a load of the new XO. They're sending us relics now. Bet she asked for a desk with a window view of the sand." The corporal smirked, didn't reply, smart. Eva didn't flinch. She had spent decades listening to things never meant for her ears. Every word, every tone, every doubt was just data. She absorbed it, stored it, moved on. Her pale blue eyes swept the base with quiet precision. The sagging corner of the western perimeter fence. The blind spot where razor wire blocked a surveillance camera. The pair of guards chatting instead of watching their sector. A base that believed it was ready but wasn't. She filed it all away, not because she wanted to, because she couldn't stop. Inside, the command post buzzed with a tired, anxious energy. Screens hummed. The smell of burnt coffee clung to recycled air. Colonel Madsen didn't look up from his terminal until she entered. His voice was flat, brittle with exhaustion. "Major Rostova, find a seat. We're mid-diagnostic." The seat waiting for her was in the corner, a small console clearly chosen for the expendable officer. It looked like a child's desk in a room of adults. Eva sat, straight-backed, hands still on her knees. She didn't move. She didn't speak. For an hour she watched as comms specialists chased phantom signals and glitches across glowing screens. Her presence was so still, so unassuming, it became unsettling. Thorne stomped in, report in hand, dropping it on Madsen's desk like a challenge. His gaze slid to Eva. "Perimeter check complete, sir. Everything's quiet, too quiet." He turned, voice pitched just loud enough. "Hope you're not afraid of a little silence, ma'am. Gets lonely out here." Eva's reply was soft, quiet, but it thickened the air around her. "I manage, Sergeant." He grunted, dismissive. He saw only lines on her face, slender bones under a rigid posture, a file so thin it was almost transparent. To him, she was a clerk, a fossil. He didn't see what coiled beneath the surface. He couldn't. Madsen finally pushed back from his desk, folder in hand. "Your record is concise." He flicked through the pages, his lips sour. 25 years of service, most of it admin, before that, black ink, redactions, whole decades missing. Eva's voice didn't change. "It's complete, sir." He scoffed. "Paperwork. They've sent me a 53-year-old clerk to be my XO. This isn't a garrison. We're a listening post on the edge of nowhere. Every soldier here's a specialist. Trigger pullers, analysts, techs. I need leaders who know which end of a rifle the bullet comes out of." The room stilled. Young eyes flicked between the colonel and the woman in the corner. "I am familiar with the operational end of a rifle," she said, low and steady. "A simple fact, nothing more." Madsen didn't believe her. He didn't need to. He waved Thorne over. "Gunny'll give you the tour. His standards are high. Try to meet them." Dismissed. Outside, Thorne leaned against a sandbag wall, arms crossed like a fortress. "Ready for the grand tour, ma'am." His smirk was easy, practiced. "Don't want you getting lost on the way to the mess hall." "Lead the way, Gunnery Sergeant." The tour was information for her, performance for him. He gestured at the motor pool, the barracks, the firing range. "We qualify quarterly, even the cooks. Not sure what the requirement is for logistics, though. Probably just need to lift a pen." Eva said nothing. Her eyes catalogued everything. Worn treads on armored vehicles, the haphazard mess of the medical supply lockers, the slump in shoulders, the way boredom hung heavy in the air. The base functioned on paper, but paper burns quickly. For Thorne it was dominance. For her it was reconnaissance. In the days that followed, she did not remain in her office. Every morning before dawn she walked the 3-kilometer perimeter alone, a slender figure packing the wire, steady as the sun. She noted fence posts that sagged, camera tremors in the wind, fresh animal tracks near a gate that weren't logged in patrol reports. Trivial things, the young thought, but Eva knew trivial things get people killed. At lunch she sat alone, listening. Specialist Chun, brilliant but anxious, muttered about unstable comm systems. Corporal Diaz, pragmatic medic, worried about supplies. And always Thorne's booming voice retelling stories, each more polished and heroic than the last. They laughed, half admiring, half afraid of him. Eva simply ate slowly, quietly, watching, storing. And then one afternoon the test came. The comms array had failed again. Screens flickered. Specialist Chun was on the verge of tears, muttering about power conduits and software patches. Madsen stood behind him, jaw tight. "Then make it work." Eva watched from the doorway. She saw the error code, saw the cascade failure hidden beneath Chun's frantic keystrokes. She crossed the room, pulled an old, dust-caked manual from the bottom of a pile, flipped to the schematic she already knew. The problem isn't software. It's the G47 regulator in the tertiary preamp. Burned out. Diagnostics won't catch it. You'll have to bypass. Chun stared at her. Thorne scoffed. "Ma'am, with respect, these are million-credit systems. Stick to the book." "The book is for garrisons, Sergeant." She didn't look at him. She asked Chun, "Do you have a soldering kit?" A minute later she was at the amplifier, hands moving with practiced calm. No hesitation. No wasted motion. 3 minutes later the dead system hummed green again. The comms room erupted in relief. Thorne's disbelief was sharp enough to cut glass. Eva simply set the tools back on the table and walked out. No pride, no explanation. She fixed the machine because it was broken, that was all. But for the first time, whispers in the mess hall shifted. Skepticism bent toward curiosity. Who was this woman? Why did she know what none of them knew? That night a ripple of geomagnetic interference flickered across the tactical display. A ripple dismissed as solar weather. 10 minutes later, the lights went out. The base plunged into silence. And in silence, Eva was most at home. The lights died without warning. Not a flicker, not a dimming fade, just a single violent stutter, then absolute dark. The hum of servers vanished. Ventilation fans cut out. Even the background throb of the base generators collapsed into nothing. For a heartbeat, it was as though the world itself had stopped breathing. Then the red glow of emergency lights burst to life, painting the command post in blood. Shadows stretched long across the walls. The silence wasn't empty. It pressed down like a weight, thick and suffocating. "Report," Colonel Madsen barked. "Total power failure, sir." A young tech's voice cracked, too sharp, too fast. "Main and auxiliary grids offline. Comms. Dead, short-range, long-range, satellite, everything. Gone." The words settled like a curse. A base without comms wasn't just blind. It was alone. Gunny Thorne shoved through the doorway, weapon drawn, his voice a growl. "Perimeter sensors are down. Gates are locked on battery, but we've got no eyes outside. Colonel, what the hell is happening?" "Get your men on the walls. Full combat gear, binoculars on every corner." Thorne nodded once, jaw clenched tight, and disappeared back into the chaos. Inside, the command center spiraled. Techs scrambled over consoles that no longer obeyed them. Emergency protocols were followed with mechanical precision, but nothing responded. Backup systems refused to connect. Breakers wouldn't reset. It was as though every nerve of the base had been cut, leaving only twitching limbs. The panic was quiet but sharp, a cold desperation threading into every glance, every breath. And then Eva moved. She had been in her small office when the lights went. No rush, no shouting. She'd simply stood, breathed once, and walked. Now she stepped into the command center, eyes narrowing against the crimson haze. Her gaze swept the room, not frantically like the others, but steady, searching. She did not look at the main distribution panel where half the techs had clustered in futility. She didn't bother with dead consoles or flashing error codes. Her focus went to the far corner, to a steel locker marked with a faded stencil, obsolete equipment, do not use. Her hand gripped the handle, locked. Corporal Diaz, her voice cut across the chaos like a blade. Calm, clear, unquestionable, bolt cutters now. The medic froze, startled, then bolted. When he returned, Eva didn't hesitate. She set the cutters against the hasp and snapped the steel lock in a single motion. The sound rang out across the tense room. The locker groaned open. Inside, dust and forgotten relics, hand-cranked generators, analog meters, thick shielded cables, tools no one had touched in 15 years. Eva dragged the diagnostics kit into the red-lit room. "Ma'am," Thorne was back, his face storming, voice full of scorn. "That's restricted equipment. What the hell are you?" "The crisis," Eva said evenly without turning, "is not that the power is off. The crisis is that you're trying to fix a system that's been flash-fried." She knelt, pulling open a floor panel, revealing thick arteries of cable beneath. "The central bus is slag, regulators fused, every microprocessor is dead. You cannot reboot what doesn't exist." Her hands were already tracing wires, steady, confident, movements too precise to belong to an administrator. "We bypass. Hard patch to generators. Copper only. No digital regulators. Get me a tri-bend, a splicer, and a spool of shielded copper." She wasn't asking. Thorne opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time in years, the sergeant had no footing. Authority had shifted, imperceptibly but completely. He glanced at Colonel Madsen. The colonel's face was pale, tight with fear, but his eyes were locked on Eva. He gave a sharp nod. "You heard her, Gunny. Get what she needs." For a second Thorne hesitated, then he turned, barking at the others. Tools were fetched, hands scrambled. The panic slowed. The room, once frantic, began to move in rhythm around her. Eva knelt in the crimson light, knife in hand. With precise flicks, she stripped thick cables bare. Her splices were clean, knots perfect, movements ritualistic. The command center fell into an almost reverent silence. Even Specialist Chun, who had been seconds from hyperventilation, steadied his breathing as he crouched beside her with a flashlight. "This wasn't a surge," Eva murmured, voice low but carrying. "Not random, it was designed. The EMP used the system's safeguards against itself. A clean sweep, every processor bricked." Chun swallowed. "Backup generators. Digitally controlled, transfer switches dead, we bridge it manually." She pointed with her chin. "Junction box, open it." He obeyed. Inside charred ruin. His stomach sank. "It's hopeless." "Give me the copper," Eva said. Her fingers moved like a surgeon, weaving crude new arteries, splicing power directly into the veins of the base. Brutal, ugly improvisation, but alive. Colonel Madsen stood frozen, watching, every assumption he had made about her stripped away. This was no paper-pushing relic, no tired desk officer. This was something else, something forged in places darker than deserts. Even Thorne, crouched now with a cable in hand, felt it. His chest was tight, not with anger but with something closer to awe and fear. For 20 minutes the command center held its breath as Eva worked. Sparks hissed, sweat dripped. Then she sat back, wiping dust from her hands. "This will power essentials only, comms, medical, perimeter lights. No climate, no mess, nothing else, and it may surge. She nodded to the soldier on the crank. Start it. The hand crank groaned. The generator coughed. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a violent spark and a guttural hum, lights flickered. One by one, consoles woke. White light banished the oppressive red. A ragged cheer rose. Relief broke like a wave. Madsen almost sagged with it. His men slumped against walls, breathless. But Eva wasn't looking at them. She was already at the comms console. Static, endless, roaring static. Chun's hands trembled over his monitor. Nothing, sir. Noise floors too high, like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. Eva took the headset. Fingers moved over dials, bypassing software filters, twisting the array into something older, rougher. The hiss sharpened, broke, shifted. Beneath it, faint, rhythmic pulses. Pattern, she murmured, a signal. The room leaned in. Beep, beep, pause, beep. A code buried under the noise, unfamiliar to every young tech. Run decryption, Madsen ordered. The analyst shook his head. Unrecognized protocol, sir, too old or too new. Eva's voice cut across him, distant. Not new, very old. She closed her eyes, listened. Her lips moved with memory. It's a Vesper cipher. The name landed like a weight. Confusion rippled through the young soldiers, but Madsen froze, his blood running cold. He knew that name. Whispers, ghost stories, a program no one ever admitted existed. He turned back to Eva, his voice hoarse. Do you know it? Her eyes opened. For the first time they were sharp, alive. The weary administrator was gone. I don't have to break it, she said quietly. I designed it. The room stopped. Absolute silence. The hum of restored systems faded behind the revelation. Colonel Madsen's hands shook as he keyed his highest clearance into his private terminal. The redacted blocks of Eva's file dissolved. And there it was. Project Vesper. Operative call sign, Echo. Status KIA. Truth deep cover. He looked up at her. This quiet, silver-haired major, once dismissed as a clerk. And for the first time in his career, the colonel felt the full weight of standing in the presence of a legend. And Eva, she was already typing, her fingers steady as she unlocked the cipher. Words resolved on the screen, sharp as blades. Sparrow compromised. Coordinates 28.45 N, 178.2 E. Hostile force, battalion strength. Request immediate extraction. We are not alone. The name struck her like a wound reopening. Sparrow, the youngest of her team, she had thought him long dead. But he was alive, and he was calling for Echo. Why hadn't she told them who she was from the start? That was the unspoken question, thick in the air of the command center. The screens glowed again, faint static washing across them. Soldiers who had dismissed her as a relic now stood frozen, watching her as though seeing her for the first time. Colonel Madsen's throat felt dry. He forced the words out. Vesper was a myth, a story. Eva didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the console, on the decrypted words still pulsing like an open wound. Sparrow compromised. Request immediate extraction. Her jaw tightened. She was listening again, but not to the static, not to the room, to echoes from another life. Thorne muttered low, as though afraid to break whatever spell held them all. I heard once about Echo, said she walked into a nest of 5 enemy Marines, alone, brought them down without firing a shot. His voice faltered. I thought it was a barrack story. It was. Eva pushed her chair back with a slow, deliberate scrape of metal against concrete. Her movements were controlled, but her eyes betrayed something else, something unsteady, hidden under discipline. For years she had trained herself to wear silence like armor, but hearing Sparrow's name, alive in the code she had once built, it cracked the armor. She remembered him, a boy with quick fingers and quicker words, always teasing, always too bright for the shadows they lived in. She had buried him in her mind years ago, one more ghost among many. Yet here he was, alive, crying for help into the storm. She exhaled once, steadying herself. "Colonel, what assets are within 300 kilometers?" The colonel swallowed hard, caught between disbelief and instinctive obedience. "Firebase Delta has a drone wing. Long range. They're outside the EMP's effect zone. If we can reach them, they could intercept in 40 minutes. Chun, still pale, spoke quickly. "The problem's transmission. Receiving we can do barely. But to broadcast coordinates through this noise, impossible. The storm saturates everything." Eva's pale eyes lifted, locking on him. "Not impossible. The storm has a rhythm. Harmonic distortion creates pockets, brief windows of clarity. If we time our burst exactly, we ride the echo wave. Instead of punching through, we let the interference carry us." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but the room heard what it really was: audacity. Chun blinked, understanding just enough to be terrified. That would take precision down to the millisecond. "I know." Madsen's gaze hardened. He had spent a career commanding men and women under fire, but in that moment he knew he was no longer the highest authority in the room. He was staring at someone who had already survived the impossible more than once. "Can you do it?" His voice cracked, not a challenge but a plea. Eva's eyes reflected the glow of the static, ancient and steady. "I can." The room shifted. No one questioned her now. Orders flowed from her mouth and hands obeyed. Chun was tasked with monitoring the ionospheric peaks. Diaz sprinted to the antenna controls. Thorne, silent now, stood watch by the door, his presence no longer mocking but protective. Eva compressed the coordinates and Sparrow's plea into a single burst packet. Fingers moved across the console in a blur, rewriting protocols like she was sculpting from memory. The silence in the room thickened, stretched, pulled tight like wire. Index peaking in 543, Chun's voice trembled. "Diaz on my mark." Her hand hovered over the console. 2-1. Mark. Diaz slammed the switch. Eva's finger struck down. A burst of data leapt into the storm. For a heartbeat, nothing. The silence roared, then confirmation. A faint return ping. Firebase Delta had received. Drones were on their way. Relief surged through the command center, ragged and raw. Soldiers laughed, slumped, clapped each other's shoulders. Madsen closed his eyes, the breath he'd been holding finally leaving him. But Eva didn't move. Her face remained tight, her shoulders straight. Only her eyes betrayed her, the faintest shimmer of something fragile, something human. Sparrow was alive. The rescue operation unfolded in fragments across the next hours. The drones launched, their encrypted feeds trickling back through static. A canyon system appeared in ghostly outlines, jagged and treacherous. Figures moved within the shadows, blurred, distorted. Enemy formations, too many for Sparrow's team to face alone. Madsen leaned over the console, his voice grim. "Battalion strength. If those drones engage alone, they won't hold." Thorne's voice was hushed. "We send men." "No," Madsen snapped. "We can't. We're blind, crippled. To send ground forces through that storm without comms would be suicide." The room fell silent. Eva stood still, one hand resting against the console, staring at the jagged canyon feed. Her silence was louder than their debate. She had spent years hiding behind it, but now it pressed outward, commanding the room. Madsen finally turned to her. "What are you thinking?" Her eyes remained on the canyon. That Sparrow knew this was a death trap when he sent the message. He wouldn't call unless there was no other way out. She straightened. "The drones buy us time, but if they falter, he dies." Madsen hesitated. "We can't." "You can't," she said softly, cutting him off. The words landed like a blow. Not loud, not angry, just true. Thorne's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. For once, he didn't argue. Eva turned to the comms feed again, where the static crackled like the memory of old ghosts. Her mind was a machine awakening after years of dormancy. Old instincts slid back into place. Variables, odds, exit routes, risks. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted to be Echo again. But Sparrow's voice, Sparrow's plea, pulled her back into the shadows she had once left behind. The drones engaged. Explosions lit the canyon in fractured flashes. Grainy images showed bursts of fire, collapsing ridgelines. For every enemy squad neutralized, more appeared. The drones were relentless, but attrition was against them. Eva's hand tightened on the edge of the console. Her breath was slow, measured, but inside her chest a storm raged. She remembered faces, her old team, ghosts she had led into fire, ghosts she had outlived. Sparrow's was supposed to be one of them, yet here he was, clawing his way through death to reach her. Diaz whispered near her shoulder, almost as though speaking to himself. "Why's she so calm? It's like she knew this was coming." Thorne, without taking his eyes off Eva, answered, "She's not calm, she's waiting." The words were truer than he realized. Eva was waiting for the decision she didn't want to make but knew she would. Hours passed in a blur of static and fire. The drones fought, but the canyon swarmed with enemies. Casualty estimates came in fragmented bursts, Sparrow's signal dipping, breaking, reforming. Every second stretched too long, every minute another blade twisting into her silence. When the canyon feed showed Sparrow's squad pinned against a cliff wall, their flares dwindling, Eva finally turned. Her voice was soft but final. "We go." Madsen stared. "We? Major, you don't have command authority to." But the words died in his throat. Authority was no longer in ranks or files. Authority was in her presence, in the eyes of every soldier in that room who now looked to her, not him. For once Madsen didn't argue. He simply nodded, a grim resignation in his face. Eva's silence had spoken, and now it was time to act. Why did no one question her? Not Madsen, not Thorne, not the analysts or the medics or the young soldiers who had once whispered about her like she was a relic. The moment Eva Rostova said the words, "We go," the entire room shifted. It was as if the center of gravity had moved, and they were all orbiting her now. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't explained. She didn't have to. Colonel Madsen closed the mission feed with a weary sigh. "Then we go," he echoed, though the words lacked her certainty. They were a commander's words, but everyone in the room knew they didn't belong to him. For a long beat, the silence held. Then the room erupted in motion, techs relaying coordinates, supply officers opening emergency stores, squad leaders calling their men to readiness. Gunny Thorne stood frozen, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on Eva. For years he had been the immovable wall in any room, the force others bent around. But not now. He had seen what she did with the power grid, what she did with the cipher. And though it burned his pride like acid, he knew what the others had only just realized. She was something else entirely. He broke the silence with a single gruff word, "Teams." Eva turned her head toward him, and for the first time since her arrival, there was no hint of distance in her expression. No guarded silence, just calm acknowledgement. "Yes, teams." The motor pool echoed with metallic clangs and hurried shouts as armored vehicles rumbled awake. Dust and exhaust curled into the night air. Eva walked through it all like a shadow cutting across firelight. Soldiers who had dismissed her days before now straightened as she passed, their movements unconsciously sharper. She stopped beside a tactical map unrolled across a hood. The canyon system sprawled in jagged lines, coordinates blinking faintly. Drones fed intermittent updates, distorted by interference. Each time the feed stuttered, Sparrow's team flickered in and out of existence, alive one second, swallowed by static the next. Madsen stood opposite her, arms braced on the metal, voice low. "We can't send the whole base. Too risky, if this storm comes again." "We don't send the whole base," Eva said. Her voice was calm but final. "We send a needle, small team, fast, surgical, In and out before the canyon closes. Madsen looked at her, really looked at her. He wanted to argue, but the weight in her eyes stopped him. Who leads it? He asked, though the answer was already carved into the air between them. Eva didn't answer with words. She just reached out, tapped the canyon coordinates on the map, and then rested her hand flat against the steel. Silence, that was her answer. Later in the armory, the ritual began. The clatter of magazines, the rasp of straps tightened, the click of bolts sliding forward. Soldiers preparing not just weapons but themselves. For most, it was familiar, routine. For Eva, it was a ghost returning. She opened the locker assigned to her, its contents untouched until now. Inside, a standard-issue rifle and officer's sidearm. She studied them for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, she set them aside. From the bottom of the locker, she drew out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unfolded it slowly, reverently. Inside lay a knife, its steel worn from decades of sharpening, its grip smooth with memory, a relic, like her. She strapped it to her thigh. The soldiers around her tried not to stare, but they couldn't help it. They watched her every motion, as though afraid the quiet woman might vanish if they blinked. Thorne approached, rifle slung across his back. He stood there for a moment, chewing on silence before speaking. "You sure about this?" Eva tightened the strap on her vest. "No." His brow furrowed. "Then why?" "Because Sparrow is still alive," she said, her voice soft, unshakable. Thorne swallowed. He wanted to argue. He wanted to protect the authority he'd always carried. But deep inside, something cracked. He'd mocked her strength, doubted her every step. And now he realized he wasn't standing in front of a relic. He was standing in front of a weapon sharpened by silence. "Then I'm coming," he said roughly. Eva looked at him. For the first time, her lips twitched in the faintest suggestion of approval. "You'll keep them alive, Sergeant. That's your role." He nodded once. It was not obedience, it was acceptance. They gathered in the briefing room, if the bare metal space deserved the name. A dozen faces, some seasoned, some barely old enough to shave, all watching her. Eva stood at the front, map projected behind her in flickering hologram light. She didn't pace, didn't gesture. She simply spoke. "Extraction point here," she said, voice even. "We insert along the eastern ridge, move through the secondary gully. Hostiles will expect direct approach. We don't give it to them. We thread the canyon, hit the signal source, and pull Sparrow's team out." A corporal raised his hand, hesitant. "What if the drones fail before we get there?" Eva's gaze held his, calm. "Then we don't fail." The answer wasn't bravado. It wasn't bluster. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through too many failures to allow another. The room stilled. Doubts died under her silence. When she finished, she didn't say questions or dismissed. She simply looked at them one by one. And when no one spoke, she nodded once. That was all. The briefing was over. Outside, the night was thick and restless. Engines rumbled. Soldiers checked gear in the shadows of floodlights. Madsen approached Eva, his uniform immaculate, his expression heavy. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice low. "Yes, I do." "Eva," he stopped himself. Not Major, not XO, just Eva. For the first time, his voice wasn't sharp or dismissive. It was almost pleading. "If you step back into this, there's no going back to silence." She studied him for a long moment. Then she looked past him, to the horizon where Sparrow's ghost waited in the canyon. "There was never silence," she said softly, "only waiting." She turned, leaving him standing there, the weight of her words pressing into him like a hand on his chest. The convoy was small. 2 armored transports, 1 light scout. Engines snarled as dust kicked up in thick clouds, headlights cutting through the desert dark. Eva sat in the lead vehicle, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. The silence inside the transport was taut, heavy with fear and anticipation. Thorne sat opposite her, arms crossed, watching her with the wary respect of a man who had finally recognized something greater than himself. The young medic, Diaz, sat beside him, jittering with nervous energy. He glanced at Eva, swallowed hard, then asked the question no one else dared. "Ma'am, were the stories true?" Her pale eyes turned to him, calm and steady. "Which stories?" The one about the 5 Marines." The transport jolted over rough ground. Eva didn't look away. "They weren't Marines," she said softly. "They were children, just boys wearing armor too heavy for their shoulders." The silence that followed was sharper than any answer he'd expected. Diaz looked down, ashamed. Thorne's gaze flicked toward Eva, something like understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't a legend to her. It was a memory she carried like a scar. The desert stretched endless ahead of them, the canyon waiting like a mouth in the distance. The static storm still whispered faintly in their comms, a reminder that the enemy's shadow was near. Inside the transport, Eva closed her eyes for a moment. She let the vibrations of the engine wash through her, the rattle of gear, the steady breathing of soldiers pretending they weren't afraid. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was moving towards something. Not duty, not orders, something older, deeper, a promise left unfinished. Sparrow's voice had reached her across time, across silence, and she would not let it go unanswered. Why did the canyon feel like a grave waiting to be filled? The transport slowed as the desert floor gave way to jagged ridges, stone teeth jutting skyward in the pale moonlight. Engines growled, low and heavy, before dying into silence. Dust hung in the air, a restless fog that seemed to breathe with them. Eva stepped out first. Boots crunched against gravel. Her pale eyes swept the darkness. The canyon loomed ahead, a labyrinth of shadows. She had walked places like this before, gullies that swallowed light, ravines where echoes never returned, places where soldiers entered alive and came out only as names on a wall. Thorne joined her, weapon slung tight across his chest. His voice was low, stripped of the mocking edge it once carried. "Feels wrong, too quiet." "It always does before it begins," Eva murmured. Behind them, the squad dismounted. Diaz checked his med kit with trembling hands. Chun adjusted the portable receiver strapped to his back, static whispering in his ears. Others loaded weapons, their faces pale under the dim starlight. They looked at her more than at Thorne, waiting for her signal, her words. But Eva gave no speech. She simply lifted her rifle and started forward. The canyon swallowed them whole. The walls rose on either side, jagged stone streaked with centuries of wind and fire. Their footsteps echoed too loud, bouncing between the cliffs until every sound felt like a shout. The moon cast slivers of light, but most of the canyon lay in shadows thick enough to hide armies. Eva moved at the front, every step measured, her posture calm. Inside, though, old instincts surged. Every curve of stone, every dark pocket was a map she had walked before. She saw it not as rock but as opportunity, cover, angles, choke points. Her mind, dormant for years, had reawakened. And along with it came the ghosts. She remembered another canyon, another mission. The air then had smelled of smoke and blood. She remembered Sparrow's laughter, sharp and fearless, bouncing off the rocks to cover fear. She remembered the sound it made when the enemy closed in, the silence after. She had buried that silence inside her for a decade. Now it returned, louder than ever. A hand brushed her arm. Thorne, his voice was a whisper. "You hear that?" She froze, listened. The canyon was never silent. Wind moved through it, dragging sand across stone in faint whispers, but beneath it something else. A metallic scrape, distant, faint, quickly swallowed. She raised her hand. The squad halted as one. They crouched in the shadows, weapons drawn, breath shallow. For long seconds the canyon gave them nothing, just darkness, just silence. Diaz swallowed hard, whispering, "Could have been rockfall." "No," Eva said, quiet, certain, "they're here." Her eyes swept the ridgeline. She didn't point, she didn't shout, she simply knew. They pressed forward, slower now. The canyon narrowed, the path forcing them into single file. Shadows shifted above. Once, twice, the faint gleam of optics caught the moonlight before vanishing. The enemy was watching, testing, waiting for the right moment. Thorne's hand tightened on his rifle. They've got the high ground. They're hurting us. Yes, Eva said. Her tone was almost detached, as though she were analyzing a puzzle. They want us deeper where the walls close. Then we don't go deeper, he growled. Eva paused, looked at him. Her voice stayed soft but carried steel. We go where Sparrow is. Thorne didn't argue. He just spat into the dirt and fell back into line. Half an hour in, the canyon bent sharply west. Static flared in Chun's headset. He winced, adjusting dials. Then through the noise, a faint voice. Broken, fragmented, but unmistakable. Echo, do you copy? Pinned. Sparrow. Chun's eyes went wide. It's him. He's alive, maybe 2 clicks ahead. The squad surged with nervous energy, but Eva held up her hand. Calm, stillness. 2 clicks in this terrain is not 2 clicks, she said. It's 20 traps laid one after another. If we rush, we die before we reach him. Her words fell like cold water, quenching the flicker of hope before it burned them alive. Diaz whispered, voice trembling, how do we get to him then? Eva looked at him, then at the jagged canyon twisting ahead. The same way we always did, quiet, patient, step by step. They advanced, slow, measured. The canyon walls loomed closer, forcing them into shadows that smelled of dust and iron. Once they passed a crevice where blood had dried black against the rock, old and forgotten. Soldiers averted their eyes. Eva didn't. She looked, absorbed it, carried it forward. Her silence pressed on them, but strangely, it steadied them. Without speeches, without promises, she led them deeper. Still, the tension grew. Every flicker of shadow looked like an enemy. Every scrape of boot against stone felt too loud. Thorne cursed under his breath once, the sound harsh against the canyon's skin. Then it came. A single shot cracked, a spark against stone. Contact, someone shouted, but Eva was already moving. She didn't duck, she didn't flinch. She stepped into cover with a smoothness that looked rehearsed. Her hand cut the air, 3 fingers flicked, then closed. A signal. The squad obeyed without question. 2 soldiers fanned left. Thorne swung right with another. Diaz crouched behind rock, med-kit tight to his chest. Chun pressed himself into shadow, antenna trembling like an exposed nerve. Shots followed, echoes slamming through the canyon. Tracers burned brief arcs of light. The squad fired back, but Eva didn't. Not yet. She studied angles, counted shadows, listened to the cadence of fire. Then she moved. A blur through dust, sliding across cover. She rose, fired twice. 2 shadows fell from the ridge, tumbling down the canyon wall. Her movements were efficient, nothing wasted, nothing showy. The squad stared, half in awe, half in disbelief. Thorne muttered under his breath, damn. The firefight escalated. Enemy rifles cracked from above, muzzle flashes stuttering like lightning. Rocks shattered, shards sliced through the air, but the squad held because she held. Eva's voice was low, steady, cutting through the chaos. 3 left ridge, 2 near gully mouth, 1 flanker west wall, mark and suppress. Her commands weren't shouted. They were spoken like inevitabilities. And each time she named them, the squad shifted, fired, pinned their targets. Within minutes, silence returned. Enemy shadows lay still on the rocks above. The canyon breathed again. The squad regrouped, breath ragged, faces slick with sweat and fear. Diaz checked the wounded, minor scrapes, nothing fatal. Thorne wiped dust from his brow, staring at Eva. His voice was hoarse, edged with something like awe. You saw them before they moved. No, Eva said quietly. I listened. Her eyes swept the canyon again, always scanning, always waiting. Chun spoke up, headset hissing. Sparrow's signal's stronger, we're close, but ma'am, his voice cracked. The drones are almost out if they fail. They won't hold much longer, Eva finished. Her voice carried no panic, only certainty. Thorne muttered, bitter but honest. So this is it, needle through the heart. Eva didn't reply. She adjusted her rifle, started forward again. The squad followed, silent now, bound by her gravity. And in the darkness ahead, the canyon waited with open jaws. Why were they all watching her in the dark? The firefight had ended minutes ago, the canyon walls still ringing faintly with echoes. The squad crouched in broken cover, catching their breath. Dust hung heavy, clinging to sweat and skin. Above them, the stars were hidden behind jagged ridges. Yet no one spoke. No one dared break the silence, except with their eyes. Every man and woman looked to Eva. She sat with her back against stone, rifle laid across her knees, eyes scanning the shadows beyond. Calm, still, like the gunfire hadn't even happened. But they all felt it. She wasn't simply calm. She was elsewhere, listening, remembering, calculating. Thorne crouched a few meters away, his massive frame hunched forward, arms on his knees. His gaze never left her. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Eva's pale eyes flicked to him. A long beat passed before she answered. "Too many times." His jaw tightened. "That's not in your file." Her gaze returned to the canyon ahead. "Most of my life is." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity thick as the dust. Diaz, ever the youngest in spirit, finally spoke. "Ma'am, Project Vesper. Is it true, all of it?" The name landed like a spark. A few of the squad flinched. Even Chun, normally buried in his comms equipment, looked up. Eva didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes just for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried something rare. "Wait." Vesper was never about stories. It wasn't about myths or legends. It was about men and women sent where no one else could go, places the Alliance didn't admit existed, missions they never wrote reports about. The kind of work that stains you so deeply you can't wash it out, no matter how many years pass. She opened her eyes again. They were distant, unfocused, seeing something none of them could. "We didn't wear uniforms. We didn't ask permission. We didn't come home with medals." Her hand unconsciously brushed the knife strapped to her thigh. "We came home with ghosts." The canyon wind shifted, carrying sand across the stone. No one spoke. Diaz swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, was quiet, almost childlike. "And the 5 Marines, that story." Eva's head tilted slightly. "Stories change in the telling." She paused, then added, "But yes, it happened." Thorne leaned forward, his voice low, almost reverent now. "How?" Eva looked at him at last, and for the first time her silence cracked. Her words came slow, deliberate. Not with strength, not with rage, with precision, with patience, with silence. "Strength doesn't come from muscle, Sergeant. It comes from control." Her eyes drifted back to the shadows ahead. "They thought I was weak, too." The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp enough to cut through every memory of how they dismissed her. Thorne looked down, ashamed. No one asked her more after that. They didn't need to. They understood. The canyon pressed tighter as they moved again. The walls narrowed, the air staler, the silence heavier. Chun's receiver crackled, Sparrow's voice flickering through static. "Position pinned, low ammo." The squad stiffened. Every syllable felt like a rope pulling them deeper, faster. Eva raised her hand. "Hold." They crouched among jagged rocks, their breathing shallow. Thorne hissed, "They're dying out there." "Yes," Eva said calmly, "and if we rush, we'll die too. Then no one gets out." Thorne cursed under his breath, but he didn't argue further. Eva closed her eyes, letting her hearing stretch into the canyon's whispers. Sand scraping against stone, a rock shifting high above. Patterns, always patterns. She had lived her life in them, and here the canyon was speaking. Finally she opened her eyes. Ambush ahead, 2 ridges, crossfire. Diaz frowned, "But we haven't seen." "You won't," she said simply. "Not until it's too late." She pointed to a narrow cut through the canyon wall, barely wide enough for one man at a time. "We go there. Through the gully, slow, quiet, no light, no sound. Thorne studied the path, a scar of darkness cutting through jagged rock, his gut twisted. That's a choke point, if we get spotted in there. They won't spot us, Eva said. Her voice carried no bravado, just certainty. The squad obeyed. The gully swallowed them like a throat. Narrow, claustrophobic. Every sound, every scrape of boot, every breath felt amplified. Diaz's gear clinked once and Eva froze, one hand raised. The squad stopped instantly. She turned her head, eyes narrowing at him. No anger, just quiet disappointment. Diaz pressed his lips together, cheeks burning. He adjusted his kit and they moved again. Minutes stretched into eternities. Shadows pressed against them close enough to touch. Somewhere above, a rock tumbled. They froze, waited. Nothing followed. Slowly, they crept forward again. When they emerged, the canyon opened wide into a basin. The moonlight revealed jagged ridges, broken boulders, and far across the clearing, the faint glimmer of gunfire. Sparrow. Eva raised her hand, signaling halt. She studied the field. Enemy positions ghosted along the ridges. Dozens of them, moving, shifting, waiting. A kill box. Her squad looked to her, fear in their eyes. Chun whispered, "We'll never make it." Eva's gaze remained steady. "Then we make them believe we already have." The plan unfolded in silence. She directed with hand signals, short whispers. No speeches, no false courage, just movement. Thorne and two riflemen looped wide, ghosting along shadows to set up counterfire. Diaz huddled low with his med kit, waiting for the inevitable. Chun adjusted his receiver, syncing with drone echoes to mask their signals. Eva herself slipped into the basin's edge, knife drawn, eyes locked on the nearest sentry. She moved like water, low, fluid, inevitable. One hand pressed over the soldier's mouth, the other sliding steel across his throat. He fell without a sound. The squad watched, stunned. Not by the violence, it was war, but by the absolute calm with which she executed it, like she'd done it 1,000 times, like it cost her nothing. But inside, it cost her everything. Each silent kill brought back every face, every mission, every ghost she'd tried to bury. They advanced in pieces. One by one, sentries fell. The basin grew quieter, shadows thinning, but the deeper they pushed, the more resistance thickened. Gunfire erupted at last, sharp and sudden. The squad returned fire, sparks and muzzle flashes painting the canyon in staccato bursts. Sparrow's signal grew stronger, his voice cutting through Chun's headset. "Holding down to 3, echo, please." The plea clawed at Eva's chest. She had led men through death before, she had lost them. But this time she would not. She crouched behind stone, breath steady, eyes burning with cold focus. "We move, now." And with that, they surged into the basin's teeth. Why did Sparrow's voice sound so close, and yet so impossibly far away? The canyon basin was alive now. Gunfire cracked from the ridges, muzzle flashes spitting in jagged arcs. Bullets chewed rock into dust, sending shards slicing through the night air. The squad huddled in fractured cover, their breaths shallow, hearts hammering. Sparrow's broken signal hissed in Chun's headset. "Low ammo, can't hold." Eva pressed against stone, eyes scanning the battlefield. She didn't blink at the chaos, didn't flinch at the gunfire. Her breath was steady, her mind working angles, timing, terrain. The canyon wasn't a trap to her. It was a board, and every enemy on those ridges was just another piece to move, dismantle, silence. 3 on the east ridge, overlapping fields, 2 near the gully mouth. 1 sniper north wall, she said calmly. "Suppress left, shift fire clockwise. Thorne on me." She didn't shout, she didn't need to. Thorne nodded once, eyes hard, rifle tight in his grip. Eva surged from cover. Gunfire tore the air where she'd been a heartbeat before. She darted low, sliding behind a fractured boulder. Thorne followed, a wall of muscle and fury, laying down suppressive bursts that carved dust clouds into the ridgeline. Eva's rifle cracked once clean, precise. A figure toppled from the rocks. She adjusted a fraction, fired again. Another fell. Every shot was deliberate, every motion efficient. She didn't spray bullets. She sculpted silence, one trigger pull at a time. The squad shifted, emboldened. Chun called out movement. Diaz dragged a wounded soldier to cover, his hands steady despite the tremor in his breath. But the enemy pressed. Shadows poured from the ridges, rifles blazing. The canyon roared with echoes. Thorne cursed, teeth bared. "They're flooding us." "No," Eva said, eyes cold, voice calm. "They're desperate." The squad advanced in bursts, leapfrogging from stone to stone. Each movement was covered, calculated. Eva never rushed, never wasted motion. Where Thorne was raw force, she was precision. Together they became rhythm, hammer and scalpel. Above, a sniper's shot cracked, sparking inches from Diaz's helmet. He froze, terror wide in his eyes. Before he could move, Eva rose, rifle steady. One shot. The sniper's body slumped, rolling down the cliff. Diaz exhaled shakily. She didn't even look at him. She was already moving again. The deeper they pushed, the louder Sparrow's signal became. "Pinned echo 3 down, I ca." His voice cracked on the last word. Eva's jaw tightened. She saw him, not as the broken transmission on Chun's receiver, but as the boy she remembered. Sparrow, laughing too loud in the dark, fingers dancing over comms panels. Sparrow, youngest of the team, always reckless, always brave. She had thought him dead for years, buried him in silence. And now he was calling her name. She would not bury him twice. The enemy pressed harder, sensing desperation. Grenades thudded, blasts shaking the canyon floor. Dust choked the air, turning the night into a storm of grit and shadow. "Chun," Eva's voice cut through the chaos. "Jammer frequency now." The specialist's fingers flew across dials. A low hum filled the air. Enemy comms sputtered, bursts of static cracking their coordination. Fire slackened, confused. Eva's squad surged. Thorne led the charge, roaring, rifle hammering. Diaz followed, dragging the wounded and throwing himself into cover again and again. Chun hunched low, antenna angled, sweat dripping into his eyes. And Eva, she moved like silence incarnate. Her rifle barked, short, precise bursts. Her knife flashed when shadows came too close. Every motion was controlled, economical, terrifying in its calm. The squad fought like soldiers. Eva fought like inevitability. Finally, they broke through the basin's center. Ahead, tucked against a jagged wall, was Sparrow's position. A small cluster of battered figures, their barricade half shattered, muzzles spitting desperate fire. And there Sparrow himself, pale, bloodied, his arm bandaged in strips of torn uniform, his face gaunt but his eyes alive. When he saw her through the chaos, his lips moved. Chun's headset caught it. "Echo." Her chest tightened. Just for a moment her calm cracked, grief and relief colliding in her ribs. Then it was gone. She moved forward, faster, sharper. "Cover fire," she snapped. The squad obeyed instantly, rifles hammering the ridges. Eva sprinted across open ground, bullets sparking around her. She slid into Sparrow's position, dropped to a knee beside him. His eyes widened. He whispered, voice raw, "You came." Eva's pale gaze held his. "Always." There was no time for reunion. The enemy regrouped, fire pouring from the ridges. The canyon shook with fury. "We can't hold," Thorne roared. Eva's eyes swept the terrain, sharp, calculating. Then there, a fault line in the cliff face. Cracks spidering across stone, weakened by blasts. "Chun, redirect drone strike, coordinates mark." Chun's fingers flew. Seconds later, a distant whine cut through the static. Then a roar as a drone missile slammed into the cliff. The ridgeline exploded, collapsing in a thunderous cascade. Rock and dust buried enemy positions, silencing half the canyon. The squad stared, stunned. Eva rose, Sparrow leaning against her shoulder, her voice steady. "Move, now." The retreat was chaos. Dust clouds choked vision, enemy fire still snapping from the far ridge. The squad dragged Sparrow's surviving team, covering, firing, stumbling through the collapsing canyon. Diaz nearly fell under the weight of a wounded soldier, but Thorne grabbed him, hauled him forward. Chun staggered with his receiver, static screaming in his ears but refused to drop it. Eva moved at the rear, Sparrow at her side. She covered every angle, every shadow, her rifle an extension of her will. The canyon walls groaned, rubble tumbling, echoes splitting the night. The enemy pressed from behind, desperate, furious. But Eva held the line, her shots precise, her presence unshakable. At last they broke through into the gully they'd entered hours before. The transports waited, engines rumbling. Soldiers dragged the wounded aboard, shouting, coughing through dust. Eva lifted Sparrow into the first transport. His eyes locked on hers, tears streaking dirt from his face. Eck. Her hand brushed his shoulder steady. You're safe now. He gripped her wrist, desperate. You saved us again. She shook her head, eyes soft for just a heartbeat. No, you saved yourself, I just listened. Gunfire cracked again. Shadows surged from the canyon mouth. Thorne turned, rifle blazing. Go, go, go. Eva lingered a moment longer, her eyes sweeping the battlefield one last time. The silence inside her surged, the silence of years, of ghosts, of scars, and she let it speak. She turned, precise, controlled, and unleashed the last of her fury into the dark. Each shot found its mark. Each shadow fell, until finally the enemy broke. Only then did she step back into the transport. The door slammed shut. Engines roared. The convoy surged into the night, leaving the canyon collapsing behind them. The squad sat in exhausted silence, lit only by the dim glow of interior lights. Sparrow lay against Diaz, eyes closed, breathing steady. The rescued soldiers slumped, too weak to speak. Thorne leaned back, rifle across his lap, eyes locked on Eva. His voice was hoarse but certain. You're not a relic, you're a damn ghost. Eva didn't answer. She sat still, rifle across her knees, eyes closed for the first time since the blackout. And in that silence, the squad understood. She wasn't just a soldier, she was something rarer. A survivor who had become the silence itself. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? The transports rolled through the desert night, engines rumbling low, dust curling in their wake. Inside, no one spoke. Not the wounded, not the weary, not even Thorne. They sat in the dim glow of red lights, staring at the floor, at their weapons, at Eva. She hadn't moved since they left the canyon. Her rifle rested across her knees, hands folded over it, eyes closed. Not asleep. She never slept in moments like these. She listened. To the hum of the engine, to the shallow breaths of Sparrow beside her, to the ghosts that always followed silence. Diaz broke first. His voice was a whisper, careful not to shatter the fragile stillness. We made it. The words felt wrong in the air, like glass dropped on stone. But they were true. Against the storm, against the trap, against the odds, they had made it. Thorne shifted, his deep voice rumbling low. No, we didn't make it, she carried us through. His eyes flicked to Eva, heavy with something like respect, something like shame. Don't pretend otherwise. The squad glanced at her. She didn't react. She didn't even open her eyes. But Sparrow stirred. His voice was weak, raw from exhaustion, but his words cut through the quiet. She always did. Heads turned. The young soldier they had fought to rescue now spoke like a man who had known her longer than any of them. She was Echo before any of you knew her name, Sparrow whispered. She was the one who pulled us through when the world was fire. You think tonight was something new. It was. It was just who she's always been. His voice cracked, and it cost her everything. Eva opened her eyes, slowly. The squad froze under her pale gaze. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just looked at Sparrow for a long, heavy moment. Then she reached out, adjusting the bandage on his arm with quiet care, as if the movement itself was the only answer she would give. Hours later, the convoy rolled into base. Floodlights bathed them in harsh white as medics rushed to meet the wounded. Soldiers who had stayed behind stared wide-eyed at the battered survivors, whispering at the sight of Sparrow alive. Eva stepped out last. Dust clung to her hair, sweat streaked her face. She carried no medals, no triumph, just the weight of survival. Colonel Madsen stood waiting. His eyes scanned the returning squad, relief breaking across his face until they landed on her. Then his expression shifted, uneasy. Respect warred with fear. "You brought them back," he said, voice low, heavy. Eva's gaze held his. She didn't answer. Sparrow, carried on a stretcher past them, turned his head. "She didn't just bring us back, sir. She saved us, all of us." Madsen looked at Eva again, searching her silence for something he could name. He found nothing, just the same stillness that had unsettled him from the start. Finally he nodded once. "Then I was wrong." Eva tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly. Not in victory, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. That night the squad gathered in the mess. Not to celebrate, no one felt like celebrating, but because they couldn't sleep. The canyon still echoed in their bones. They sat at a corner table, weary faces lit by dim bulbs. Diaz's hands shook as he nursed a cup of bitter coffee. Chun kept adjusting his headset, though there was no signal left to catch. Thorne sat silent, jaw clenched, staring at nothing. And Eva, she sat apart as always, alone at a small table back to the wall, eyes distant. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't spoken since returning. The others glanced at her, again and again. She felt their eyes but didn't return them. Finally Thorne rose. His boots echoed across the floor as he approached her table. He stood for a long moment, staring down at her. Then, with the heavy grace of a man who'd carried pride too long, he spoke. "I was wrong." Her eyes lifted, pale and calm. He swallowed, words rough. "You're not weak, you never were." The mess hall had gone silent. Every soldier listened. Eva studied him, then looked past him to the squad at the other table. Their faces were open, waiting, uncertain. She let the silence stretch until it felt like stone pressing down. Then softly she spoke. "You all think strength is what wins, but strength breaks. Strength burns. It's not about how hard you can hit or how long you can fight." Her gaze drifted, her voice almost a whisper. "It's about control, about patience, about carrying the silence when no one else can." Her eyes returned to Thorne. "That's what makes you unbreakable." The room breathed as one. Soldiers looked at her not as a myth, not as a relic, but as something rarer, a survivor who had learned what it meant to endure. Thorne nodded slowly. His voice was quiet. "Then teach us." For the first time, the faintest trace of warmth touched her lips. Not a smile, something smaller, softer. "You already learned in the canyon." And with that she stood and walked out, leaving them with her silence. Dawn broke over the desert. Eva stood alone at the edge of the base, watching the horizon burn gold. Her rifle rested at her side, her shadow stretched long across the sand. She thought of Sparrow, alive in the infirmary. She thought of the squad, changed forever by a night in the canyon. She thought of the years she had hidden, waiting for silence to bury her. It never had. Her hand brushed the knife at her thigh. Old steel, old ghosts, she carried them still, but they no longer owned her. Behind her the base stirred awake. Engines rumbled, orders barked, life resumed its relentless march. But for this moment there was only the horizon, only the silence, only her. And in that silence she finally understood. Strength wasn't noise, it wasn't fury, it wasn't medals or glory or recognition. Strength was the hand that carried others when they couldn't carry themselves. Strength was the silence that endured when everything else broke. Strength was dignity that didn't speak because it didn't have to.